Hello again, and welcome to your weekly dose of higher consciousness. I am your happy host and trumpeter of truth, Liz Garcia, and I'm also a founder of the Mind, Body, Spirit Network. And every week, I like to bring you topics on levels of consciousness, understanding where true power, true love, and true life's fulfillment really exists. And this week, we have an interesting topic that I came across in one of Dr. Hawkins' books. And if you're new to the videocast or podcast, I refer to the teachings of Dr. David R. Hawkins and all of his books into the research of consciousness and understanding levels of consciousness and putting it all into context. And this week, in his book, Truth versus Falsehood, I'm going to show that to you on the screen for those of you watching, Truth versus Falsehood, there's a section in there that refers to this article that it looks like an Indian name. A woman wrote this article in 2004 in the Arizona Republic, and it was called 10 Noble Traits of Americans. And Dr. Hawkins calibrated the level of consciousness of this article that she wrote, and it calibrated it 470 on the map of consciousness, which is huge. And it's simply stating that what she's saying is true at a very high level of consciousness, at least for our own planet. Anything in the 400s is significant, as most of the planet is operating below 200 on the map of consciousness. So that's our topic today, 10 Noble Traits of Americans. And I really love this. I think it's going to warm your heart and you're going to feel good about being an American, which is not to say other parts of the world aren't of higher consciousness either, but America has been of the highest consciousness. And it's no wonder that people want to flock here. So before we get started, we have two other things that I do in every week's weekly dose of higher consciousness. And that is we take a look at one of Dr. Hawkins' 101 Ways to Happiness. And this week we're on to number 18, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And the other thing that I do is I present you with a quiz and ask you which is of highest consciousness, and I give you three things to take a look at. And this week I think it's a good idea to take a look at America and forms of government. So the three things I want you to consider, which is of highest consciousness. Is it a democracy/republic, which is what America is founded on? This is our form of government, is a democracy, also known as a republic. Is it the government of the Iroquois Nation, which was a nation of Native Americans in the Northeast? I'll have to check the date. I'll get the details on that at the end. So it was that their form of government is the Iroquois Nation. And the last form of government is socialism. Of the three, which is of the highest consciousness? And I think this is a good time to share this, as there's a lot of, political stuff going on that isn't true. And things being perceived about America that isn't true. And we'll talk about what that means, that it isn't true. So I will answer the question, the answer to the quiz will be at the end after we discuss everything else today. And happy holidays. Today is December 16th, 2019, as I am recording this broadcast. And we're going to first start with 101 Ways to Happiness after our quiz, which I've already done the quiz part. So 101 Ways to Happiness is that you need to realize that all value is arbitrary, meaning you decide what you put value on, and that's your perception of it, and that's your decision as to why it's meaningful and valuable to you. Now, and just because you value it doesn't mean anyone else has to value it. And this is where, how can you be happy as you let go of having to prove or convince anyone else of the things that you value. Because when you hold a position on something, your level of consciousness goes down into the below 200. When you hold a position that you have to be right and you got to prove it and all this stuff, you're not in the land of happiness anymore. So in order to maintain your own energy level of happiness or glad or contentedness or gratitude, you let go of having to convince anybody that what you value is of value. Now, the only value that is independent of personal opinion is calibrated on the map of consciousness. If you want to understand what true value of anything is, it's helpful to understand levels of consciousness and how to calibrate the value of anything. So that's where the map of consciousness puts everything into context. Like if you value being righteous, as an example, that you have to be right and your opinion matters. And if you understand the map of consciousness, you'll see that it doesn't have any value because it's a lower level belief you're holding, and the need to prove yourself right holds no energy. So that's just one example of what do you value. Let's say you value a beautiful cathedral. Like some of the great cathedrals around the world calibrate in the high 700s, which is huge. It's a huge level of consciousness that those cathedrals are and represent. That is something that clearly is of value, whether you understand it or not. So understanding, you're giving up your happiness if you have to prove to anyone else that, or persuade anyone else that something that you value is of value. So let go of that and realize that everyone's, perception of anything is based on their own level of consciousness on any particular issue. So today I want to go back to this article that I want to share with you, in which Dr. Hawkins calibrated in his Truth versus Falsehood book at the level of 470 on the map of consciousness. Now, the woman that wrote this, I don't know that I can pronounce her name properly, but if you Google, what I Googled was 10 Noble Traits of Americans in the Arizona Republic, and the woman's name is Mantosha Singh Devji, and I'm pretty sure that's a Hindu or Indian name. M-A-T-O-S-H-E, Singh, S-I-N-G-H, Devji, D-E-V-J-I. And you'll find a clipping of it, which was written in July of 2004. So it's like, 16 years ago that this was written. But what she's expressing is her gratitude and appreciation for what Americans really are. And I'm just going to read right out of the book because it's beautifully written and it calibrates to 470. And let's see what the 10 traits are. The first one is godly. Almost all of us acknowledge that a power beyond us guides the swirling destinies of men. The Native Americans pray to a great spirit and with a reverent heart tie it to the sacred earth and skies of America. Number 2 in 10 qualities that define us as Americans is tolerant. European Christians settled this land and wrote its constitution. By the way, the Constitution is of very high consciousness in the 700s. It's huge. Along with the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, they're all in the 700s, which is the land of truth and the mystic. There's a ton of truth being spoken through those, and to disparage or dismiss them as less than is kind of like an error or a misunderstanding that there's anything, they're worthy, and this is what's been kind of the compass for this country that we live in. So, tolerant, number 2. European Christians settled this land and wrote its constitution. Then they opened their arms wide and welcomed people from the rest of the world. Now mosques, synagogues, and temples pepper the landscape along with churches. Muslims can worship more freely here than in most Muslim countries. Sikhs wear their turbans and Jews wear their yarmulkes. So tolerant is number 2. Visionary is number 3. While we are an earthbound nation enjoying our material success, we are also an extraordinarily visionary people. We dare dream impossible dreams. We soar the skies, searching the stars. We have landed on planets that lie shrouded in billions of years of silence. On Earth, our vision in the healing arts will literally make the lame walk and the blind see. Visionary is the land of genius, the intellect in the 400s. Genius level is at 499. Inspiration is kind of seated, is fertile ground in this higher level of consciousness. Inspiration can come to life because of this, as my guess. I have calibrated as true, but based on everything putting into context, it's my guess that higher levels of consciousness within the collective can't help but fertilize inspiration and genius level seeds. Number 4, 10 noble traits of Americans is that we're prosperous. The capacity of Americans to work hard joyously is the stuff of which the wealth of this country is made. Now, working hard calibrates at around 205 on the map of consciousness. It is of higher consciousness. However, playing hard is of even more higher consciousness, which calibrates at around 375. So when you enjoy, joyously work hard, you're playing, work is not work anymore. You're having fun. You can't help but manifest tremendous things in our society. So prosperous. Our work ethic is unmatched. We are the richest country in the world, but our children start babysitting, bagging groceries, and cutting lawns when they are still in school. I know I did that. I delivered newspapers. I worked at a deli all throughout high school and college. I worked at my mother's office, copying stuff. It's just an example that we all have it within us to want to work and contribute and be a part of the American way. America is generous. There's possibly no country on earth that has been untouched by the generosity. Next up is generosity. There is possibly no country on earth that has been untouched by the generosity of Americans. We respond to earthquakes, floods, and famines with compassionate hearts. We send money, medicines, clothes, and prayers to victims of every color and creed, and even to our enemies. We know that they are custodians, that we are custodians of wealth, not its owners. That's kind of a beautiful thing. Resilient. Americans are resilient. This is number 6. Americans have an uncanny capacity to bounce back from adversity, accidents, bankruptcies, and divorces. They rebuild their bodies, businesses, and lives. They do not sit in the dark corners. They fight back. Number 7, courageous. Courageous is the level of consciousness of 200, and valor, which is the willingness to have the courage to be who you are, calibrates at 505 on the map of consciousness. I think it's fair to say that America in general is valorous as a nation. And courage is 205, is it's the first level of consciousness you get into where there's actual power. When you step into courage, you're now stepping into your own power. But to be valorous is a quantum leap in consciousness at 505. So courageous. A 4-year-old in my neighborhood comes around the corner wearing a helmet, riding a scooter, and my aunts in India still hold on to their 14-year-olds protectively. Americans seem to be born with an extra streak of courage. It seems to be seared into our soul. We teach the world the meaning of the word and our daring spirits and our exploits. With our daring spirits and our exploits. Number 8 is humorous. Humor, to have a good sense of humor and to be humorous in general is of a very high level of consciousness. And I'm pretty sure to have a good sense of humor is about 345 on the map of consciousness. To be humorous, it calibrates, I think it's pretty high. I have to look it up. It's somewhere between 450 and 500 to be humorous. It's of a very high level of consciousness, especially not to take yourself so seriously is a high level of consciousness as well. So humorous is number 8 on the top 10 traits, noble traits of Americans. Americans love laughter and life. You can tell an American abroad because he is generally the one who has the biggest smile, sometimes the loudest voice and laughter, and is the most approachable. An American will fill a room with his infectious goodwill and just will not treat anyone as a stranger. Number 9 on the noble traits is self-introspection. Occupying the unique position that we do in the world, we could be really arrogant and indifferent to people's opinions. But we are childlike in our need for approval. We are a self-introspective people. We dissect our actions and thoughts. We form committees and we discuss them in newspapers, television, and town hall meetings. Now finally, last and least on the list of the top 10 noble traits of Americans is that America has a sweetness to it. Countries, like people, become dry and arid if the quality of sweetness is absent from the souls of their citizens. Americans have been blessed with a rare quality of sweetness of the soul. Because of its positive qualities, America attracts millions of immigrants from all over the world, as it has for centuries. Although this woman's description of America is specific to the United States, her capacity to see the positive reflects what could also be apparent to visitors or immigrants to other countries that also represent freedom and opportunity. Her statements, which calibrate at 470 on the map of consciousness, are included to serve as a contrast to the current hate America views, which all calibrate below 200. So, many foreigners and immigrants perceive the way Miss Devji is perceiving America. And to have hateful feelings towards America is a reflection of your own inner, what's going on within you. It has nothing really that's not true that there's anything to hate about America, except for how you are perceiving it. So I really wanted to introduce this today because it's kind of, it may even be called like a spiritual error to perceive America in this way. It's not a judgment, it's a wake-up call to take a look at yourself and understand that your ability to perceive the truth about America is blocked by your own inner feelings, beliefs, typically suppressed and repressed emotions would create these perceptions that are not true. And that's why I really wanted to create this podcast and video cast, is to help all of us put into context the truth. And it's kind of funny, Dr. Hawkins calibrated the statement. Well, he wanted to know what percentage of the earth, of its inhabitants, even cares about the truth. And he only came up with 2%. So this is just a wake-up call to all of us to realize that most of us have no clue or interest in the truth. And even there's some topics that I like am not willing to face the truth on yet, I'm sure. But as you let go of lower levels of emotions as they come up and you let them go, eventually, life is going to show me what I'm still holding on to that isn't true. And this is true for all of us. When you're willing to accept the truth about anything and you ask life to show me what am I holding on to that isn't true, something's going to trigger it and bring it to your attention. So then you can decide, okay, I didn't know this was still in me. I'm willing to let it go. So that's today's lesson. I really appreciate, I wish I could say this woman's name, Mantoshi Singh Devji. This is a Hindu name, and I don't really know it very well. Anyway, let me see what it says here. She's a writer and author and president of the Republican Women's Action Alliance. All right. So there you have it. And now we're going to go to our weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. Although I usually do an affirmation. Let's do an affirmation first, because our country deserves an affirmation and an acknowledgement that is of significantly higher consciousness. And the simple affirmation can be, I'm willing to accept that the United States of America calibrates at around 420 on the map of consciousness and is of one of the highest levels of consciousness on the planet. And it deserves our love and respect. So I'm willing to accept that the United States of America is of higher consciousness. And I understand if I perceive it otherwise, it's on me to let go of the feelings that are blocking the truth of this. That's our willing to accept is a big one, and understanding. So this is good for the mind too. I'm willing to accept the understanding that the calibration level of the United States at 420 is very high and deserves our love and respect. All right, on to the weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. So this is kind of related to America and our form of government. So the first one, which is of highest consciousness? A democracy/republic, which is what our form of government is here in America. The form of governance of the Iroquois Nation, which was, let me just tell you what the Iroquois Nation was from Wikipedia. It's interesting. It's good to know our own American history. So the Iroquois Nation, and I can't pronounce its Haudenosaunee, is another name for the Iroquois Nation that's also known as People of the Longhouse. They are a historically powerful Northeast Native American confederacy in North America. There's a hint, historically powerful. They were known during the colonial years to the French as the Iroquois League and later as the Iroquois Confederacy, and to the English as the Five Nations comprising Mohawk Nation, Onondaga, Oneida, Cayuga, and Seneca. After 1722, they accepted the Tuscarora people from the southeast into their confederacy, as they were also Iroquoian speaking and became known as the Six Nations. So, a democracy/republic. This is forms of government. The form of government of the Iroquois Nation, and then the third one is socialism. What do you think is of highest consciousness? They're all of higher consciousness, just so you know. Let's start with the lowest level of consciousness. Socialism calibrates at 305 on the map of consciousness. Let me double check that, make sure that's correct. Yes, 305 on the map of consciousness, which is of higher consciousness, but it is significantly lower than the other two. Now, socialism is showing up in our awareness these days. People think socialism is a good idea. And socialism could be perceived as a good idea if you're coming from a lower level of consciousness, which still 50% of the United States is coming from a lower level of consciousness below 200. So socialism can look like a good thing because when you're coming from 200, it's the energy of victimhood. You feel like you're a victim. And again, this is not a judgment. It's just to help you to understand where you may be coming from and why you would think socialism could be a good idea for the United States. The Iroquois Nation calibrated at 399 on the map of consciousness, which is a significant leap in power, truth, and consciousness above socialism. And it's almost at anything above 350 solves problems, according to consciousness research. So to kind of accept a socialist form of government is taking a nosedive. It's going backwards in the United States, essentially. And it's accepting a form of government that doesn't really solve problems. I mean, it can, but you got to hit 350 and above to really start solving problems. And I don't quite fully understand this calibration of problem solving, because at higher levels of consciousness, you can still solve problems above 200. But socialism at 305 is a major step back in consciousness for the United States of America. Now for the highest level of consciousness, the form of government of a democracy or a republic calibrates at 410 on the map of consciousness. Okay, so 410, and the only other form of government I found that was higher than this was an oligarchy, and I'm not quite sure how that form of government works. I have to look it up. Oligarchies calibrate at 415. So if anything, it would make sense for a form of government to evolve to a higher level, which would be an oligarchy. Again, I don't know what that is. I have to look it up, but it's of higher consciousness. So at 410, the form of government of a republic or a democracy is in the land of the mind, which is the land of reason. All right, this is a rational, reasonable level of consciousness. Whereas the 300s, which is where the level of consciousness of socialism is, and the Iroquois Nation, but it's really, the Iroquois Nation is bordering on 400, even though it's a logarithm, and 1 point on the map is huge up at this level. But in the land of socialism, it's no wonder that it's filled with emotionality. This is the land of emotionality in the 300s. So I hope you found this helpful today. And if you want the United States of America to remain the superpower that it is, and the land of freedom and that holds up our Constitution and Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence, I think it makes sense to stay at our high level of consciousness as a democracy or republic, or step it up into an oligarchy. That's it for today's weekly dose of higher consciousness. I hope you found this helpful, that putting everything into context so you can stop guessing what the truth is helpful to you in your life and your own way of being. Happy holidays to everybody out there. We're stepping up into 2020, a new decade. Woo! I'm here to help you move into higher levels of consciousness in the decade ahead. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, please share it, make a comment, or subscribe to my podcast at, I forget what it's called, trumpeteroftruthradio.com. Or if you prefer the video version, you can follow me at trumpeteroftruth.tv.com. And go check out the mindbodyspiritnetwork.com, our sponsor for this lovely podcast and video cast, and all things mind, body, spirit. See you next week.